Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and doing well. So, welcome to today's webinar, Managing the People and Technology Change Requirements for Procurement 4.0, brought to you by GRA and Zycus. First of all, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for attending this webinar. I am Simanti, and it's a pleasure to be facilitating this webinar. Before starting, I would like to go over a few housekeeping notes. We want this webinar to be as interactive as possible, so please feel free to send in your questions on the chat box made available to you on the webinar platform. Since we have 5 speakers for the webinar, please type in the name of the speaker you want the question to be addressed to. We will share the webinar recording and handouts with you within 2 working days. Going ahead, I would like to give you all a context on Zycus and GRA. Adriel, could you please move to the next slide? Adriel? Yeah, thanks. Uh, Zycus is a leading provider of procure-to-pay as well as source-to-pay suite. On a strategic side, we have sourcing, spend analytics, contract management, and supplier management. On the operational side, we have e-invoicing, e-procurement, and a lot of other modules. Adriel, the next slide. Now coming to GRA. GRA is a leading Australian supply chain consulting company and one of Zycus's most valued partners. They specialize in supply chain, logistics, procurement strategy, planning, and execution. Going forward, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists for today. At this point, starting with Andrew Dillon. Andrew is a senior manager at GRA and has more than 2 decades of experience in consulting and management roles in procurement, supply chain, and logistics. Carter McNutt. Carter is the founding partner of GRA and the director of Supply Chain Business Institute. He has over 20 years of international supply chain advisory and transformation experience in various industries. Timothy Hetzel. Tim is a senior consultant at GRA. Since joining GRA, Tim has worked across a broad range of consulting engagements and has deep experience with SAP and game systems in the supply chain. Ashish Nayak. Ashish is a senior solution consultant at Zycus for the Asia Pacific region. He has played a vital role in evaluating customer requirements and achieving end-to-end procurement transformation across these regions. And finally, I would like to introduce you to our moderator and speaker for the day, Adriel Pinto. Adriel has been with Zycus for almost 7 years and has worked with multiple teams, including Zycus University, facilitating the digitization journey for clients and their suppliers. At this point, I would like to hand it over to Adriel to take the session forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Simanthi, and welcome everyone to our webinar for today. And again, thank you for pulling out some time. In today's webinar, we're looking forward to sharing a few insights, experiences, and thoughts about our journey of our clients and clients we've spoken to in digitization and Industry 4.0 technologies, along with insights on how do you manage the change for your people, of course, and for processes and other aspects of change with Industry 4.0. From the agenda, we're going to start off with a quick introduction of procurement in the last 10 years, along with challenges and a description of what the Industry 4.0 technologies encompass for procurement. We're going to look at where the trends lie in terms of usage of these technologies and how successful have organizations been in managing this change. We'll also take a look at how do you manage your supply chain with the COVID-19 crisis. Of course, we've gotten a lot of insights from the clients that we're working with and supporting through this crisis. The first 6 points will be taken up by our colleagues at GRA, and me and Ashish from Zycus will talk to you a little about our insights and experiences with our clients in technology, with insights during the COVID-19 crisis and what we've been using AI for to provide our clients with a better output from technologies like this. We'll also take a look at how do you handle the people aspect of the change with AI and procurement, and we'll talk a bit bit about our experience over clients who have actually moved from paper-driven processes and are today in processes that are driven with AI and bots. I hope the session is useful for you. And yes, we do have our chat lines open. If you have a question, please feel free to put your question in there. We've reserved 5 minutes at the end for any questions. At any point of time, do put in your questions on the chat window and we'll address all of them during the Q&A section. What we'll also do is send out collaterals like Simanthi mentioned, and we'll try and ensure that all questions, if we've not gotten a chance to answer them today, are answered while we're sending out those collaterals. All right, perfect. Andrew, over to you.
Okay, Carter.
Hi, I'm Carter McNabb from GRA. Just to do a little bit of scene setting, I just wanted to talk about some of the larger trends in business and society that are really setting the stage for the advancements we're seeing in this sort of technology and the requirements that are driving it. This slide is actually a picture that I took from a National Geographic, and in this National Geographic, it was talking about both the increase in population and also the increase in the amount of data that was being generated by an increasing population. And the call-out bubbles that you see in the image that say things like, based on a social circle, likely to repay a loan, search engine records indicate coming down with the flu. These were all insights that MIT labs could generate simply by looking at someone's search engine history with a very high degree of accuracy. And this article probably came out 7 or 8 years ago. So I mean, this is in terms of the pace and rate of change, this is actually dated, but it was giving you a sense for what was available. And to put this in context, it took 200,000 years of human history for the world's population to reach 1 billion people, and only 200 years more to reach 7 billion. There were 1 billion people on the planet in 1800, and by 1930, 2 billion, and today there's nearly 8 billion. So there are people alive who have seen the population quadruple. And we're generating vast oceans of very granular data with the advent of technology, internet browsers, mobile phones, and various tracking, recording, and sensing devices. Just another interesting fact is YouTube is now the second largest search engine behind Google. It's also owned by Google. And about 300 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute, and that equates to about 82.2 years of content being uploaded every day. So what we're getting is more visibility and insight closer and closer to the point the customer makes a decision. Supply chains can leverage this with predictive capabilities. So Amazon has a predictive replenishment capability that it uses, for example. And what it really means for supply chain and procurement professionals is that given that we have this growing population, growing data pool and complexity, it makes the ability to efficiently extract insight a fundamental competitive advantage. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Okay. On this next slide, you'll see a diagram that shows various technologies, big data, cybersecurity, cloud technology, human interfaces, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. And that spectrum of technology, again, creates a new landscape in which you operate. Another thing to point out is that supply chains in general are becoming longer. So supply chains are increasingly global. They've become more complex because we have more options in terms of sources of supply, degrees of freedom around logistics networks and also delivery options, and also those channels. They're also much more fragmented because of product proliferation, and the customer service offer has fragmented incredibly as well. So they're longer, they're more complex, and more fragmented. And that also has decreased the cycle times in supply chain and procurement processes. So that really puts pressure on procurement capabilities to keep pace. So skills in structuring, maintaining, and interpreting data will be in high demand as we move forward. and see more adoption of AI and machine learning in the industry. And as such, procurement professionals need tools and technologies that deliver competitive advantage in this environment. I'll hand back over to you, Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Carter. We'll go to the next slide. So that's the macro situation in both society and industry, and we'll bring it to what this means for procurement. But first, I'd like to look at perhaps the last 10 years of procurement. And if we look at coming out of the GFC, the global financial crisis, there was a real need for cost reduction, and many procurement teams were given the task of simply reduce cost and save money. So savings became a key measurement for procurement teams for success, and this was often reported to executive level and sometimes, some cases, to board level. Intelligent sourcing and smart buying became a focus, and this developed into good, solid category management, where people really understood their categories, understood the market, and had a good knowledge around that. In the background, there was corporate social responsibility became far more important. So things like ethical sourcing, sustainable sourcing, and more recently, particularly in Australia, prevention of modern slavery in sourcing. But over this time, the low inflation environment in many countries helped sourcing keep costs low, and there were a lot of procurement success stories. More recently, systems and automation helped enormously with procurement, and that's quite a new challenge and quite a new enabler to procurement. But this brought the challenge of new skill set requirements. So if you're bringing in new systems and you're moving from manual process to automation, you've got a lot more data, as Carter was talking about, then you do need a new skill set. Where are we today in 2020? The organisations that have done that rather well, gone from good sourcing to good category management, brought in systems automation, managed data with good technology skills, are in a good place to manage the challenges of COVID-19, where we've just seen really how things changed dramatically in the last 4 or 6 weeks. So over 10 years, many procurement teams have had great success, but it hasn't been really across the board. There's been some challenges. We'll move to the next slide. We'll have a look at what the challenges that are still there with teams are, and also going to the external challenges. So while procurement teams have had a great deal of success in managing costs, we've seen some companies where it's not really well understood what the value proposition for procurement really is. So there's been a focus on cost reduction, and organisations have sort of said, well, is that it? Is it just around cost reduction? And that's created a reporting environment based on procurement savings. And so there has been some scepticism toward that, and procurement organisations know that they can get cost reductions, they can impact the bottom line, but often they're not visible to the whole organisation going forward. As the easy savings have been captured, transitioning to other areas have been more difficult from a skill point of view. So areas like process efficiency throughout the whole supply chain, continuous improvement, process automation through digital systems, and that's been difficult to bring in due to talent issues. And these are all the areas where good organisations are managing the current issues with the COVID-19 issues. And lastly, we still work with some organisations. We still see some organisations with manual, paper-based process and complex processes that add no value. So it's still there, and it's still an issue for organisations. And at times of stress, they will really hold up the company's progress. From an external point of view, there's a number of issues or challenges which are really no longer optional as to whether they're addressed by procurements. The whole digital transformation is not an option anymore. So it's here, and it's a requirement for business to move forward, and faster cycle times, new technologies, and particularly with things like, from a customer point of view, same-day delivery, real-time planning, daily demand forecasting. It's created more complex supply chains. And what we're finding at the moment is that the resilience of a supply chain is such an important issue with the COVID-19 challenges. But new technologies are becoming the norm. So predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, and as Zycus colleagues will talk in more detail around that. But the key thing is the increasing speed of change. Change is the new normal, and organisations that have changed their mindset to a continual digital roadmap and accepting change are doing much better than those that haven't. Let's move to the next slide. So what are the procurement trends going forward? There's some very clear trends in procurement. We find that good procurement teams have really acknowledged these trends, and they've adapted their organisations to meet the challenges. The first thing is accepting the requirement for faster cycle times as a result of a number of things, including advanced forecasting, predictive analytics, real-time planning, and including customer expectations as well. So good organisations, we find, are moving to an agile procurement approach. So the old ideas of fixed teams, fixed processes, fixed timeframes really don't work in the new world where we need to be agile, we need to be flexible, we need to meet short-term business requirements where they can change quite quickly with customer requirements. But the faster cycle times, managing faster cycle times is really helped by new technologies, including digitization of processes and tools, and including the no-touch processing from AI and the bots that Zycus will talk about later. So a big enabler here is skills. To manage all of this, the new digital skills are in demand, including moving to cloud technology, managing cloud technology, which gives visibility across whole supply chains. And the next slide. So the innovative use of data. So we've got digitized processes, we've got cloud technology, we've got complex supply chains where we have visibility, greater visibility of supply chains. That gives us a lot more data, and this provides real-time transparency going forward. And we're seeing good organisations use this data to go beyond cost savings, but also looking at potential efficiencies within the supply chain and where the improvements are. Although interesting at the moment, a focus on cost is a real importance within the COVID-19, and digital tools like Zycus are giving organisations very good visibility of where their cost base are. So the efficiency focus is relevant where cloud technologies and digital tools exist, and that's really coming in where we have the integrated supply chains, where we've got visibility of our suppliers, and in some cases our suppliers, and stock in different locations and in the international supply chains. Okay, thanks. Next slide. So the big driver for all this, the big enabler for success in this area is digital transformation. And certainly what we're seeing is that we're seeing leading companies that succeed in this area base their digital plan on overall readiness of the organisation. So it's not just an issue around technology replacement. Organisations that treat digital transformation as just a technology problem to be solved with new technology really don't do as well unless they look at the whole organisation and the whole change management required. And we've got a clip from the Wall Street Journal. This was early 2019, but it calls out that businesses predict digital transformation to be the biggest risk factor in 2019. And executives are increasingly concerned about the operational challenges surrounding digital transformation. From a procurement point of view, what we see is two important things for this to succeed. Firstly, deep engagement with the business. So the agile approach for procurement has procurement much closer to the business, be able to react as the business reacts. So it's deep engagement. And secondly, it's the significance of change across three areas: technology, culture, and operations. And they're really important if you take the view that it's not just a systems or a technology change, but it's a change for the whole organisation. I might go to the next slide. I'll pause there and I'll call in my colleague, Tim Hetzel, who's had quite some experience in managing change and technology, particularly with Zycus. Tim.
Thanks, Andrew. So Andrew just touched on the change requirements, but I think if we just go a bit deeper on that and start with, well, what does good look like in managing the change as part of a digital transformation? And so in our experience with clients that do this well, they start by adapting the procurement function's value proposition. And so they look to become more of an enabling function within the business by focusing on value adds such as efficiency, innovation, and risk identification and mitigation, rather than just focusing purely on cost, like Andrew touched on earlier. It's also key in the beginning when managing the change that there is a clear case for change, and that's where the procurement function and the wider organisation understands how they'll benefit from the digital transformation. So we find if there is an understanding from the business and in what it stands to gain,
from the outset, and this is both up at the exec level, but then also down to those physically using the tool, we find that there's less resistance to the, throughout the entire process. So this, as a result, should really occur before, during scoping and building that business case and the case for change, but also during and after implementation of the solution. So it's just front of mind for all stakeholders. An effective strategy we see in building the case for change, and we've seen this in some clients, and this is taking an industry view and looking at how similar organisations have been able to improve their overall procurement maturity from implementing a digital roadmap and being able to clearly outline and state the types of benefits they've realised as a result. So just, next slide, please, Adriel. Just as that comes up, so a second key approach in effectively managing the change is to involve cross-functional teams, and this throughout all stages of the transformation. And this is really to minimise the resistance that the change might bring. So, in particular, having strong input from a range of business units while scoping the requirements of the solution, then during the actual physical evaluation of the tool, and then eventually maintaining this involvement through implementation. This really ensures that there are advocates across the business, because ultimately what's implemented at the end is in part these stakeholders' design too. It's also important that there's a strong people focus throughout the transformation, and this is to ensure that the diverse training needs of the business are well understood, and training can be flexed based on the user base's specific requirements. So ensuring things like geographical location, the type of role, or current digital or analytical capability is in no way a hindrance to the adoption of the tool post-go live, because those needs have been identified up front. Just the next slide, please, Adriel. So a third effective approach we find good organisations adopting is to appropriately review the processes, systems and data impacted by the digital transformation, and to do this upfront. And so what does this really involve? So unsurprisingly, step one is to choose the right tool, and that's a tool that's flexible enough to cater to the business's needs, but then to take the time to review the organisation's processes to ensure that the processes you want to follow in the future are reflected in the tool during implementation. Also, it's really important that the integration of legacy systems is considered in detail, and the necessary touch points are identified upfront. So rather than working through these requirements during implementation where there's a bit of a race against time, it also ensures that IT departments and any integration partners are fully across the scope and design of the solution and the integration requirements from the beginning. And finally, Adriel and Ashish will demonstrate this later in their presentation, but digital solutions such as Zycus, they have this amazing analytical capability with things like AI, but they're really only as effective as the data that's fed into them. So a big component of any digital transformation is a data cleansing step, and that's to ensure that the data fed into the tool is both robust and structured and clean, but also so that we can get meaningful insights from it. So we found that if this doesn't happen and that there are data issues at go live, it instantly compromises the credibility of the tool and impacts adoption rates down the line. So to get this right through upfront and identifying it within an implementation is really important. So all of this is all well and good in the normal operating environment, but what we're facing at the moment is most certainly not the normal operating environment. So I'll hand back to Andrew just to touch on some of the disruption that an event like COVID-19 can bring to supply chains and what we're seeing in the industry as a result.
Thanks, Tim. Next slide. Yes, so certainly things have changed in the last 4 or 6 weeks. When we were planning this webinar a few months ago, we were still in the normal operation. So things have changed. We've included in here, I suppose, some of the things we've seen and some of the actions that leading companies that we know are undertaking. So certainly in some organisations, there's far higher demand, particularly in FMCG, groceries for goods and services. Other industries, of course, have seen their demand drop away. But there's also been disruption to logistics services and some service centres, particularly with international supply chains and where lockdowns have impacted logistics centres, for example. So extended supply chains are showing some extreme stress in some cases. And this is where the resilience of the supply chain really comes in. What do we mean by resilience? It's whether it's it's able to take a shock. So if demand has increased, or if some logistics centres have stopped, or suppliers have become unreliable, that's a key issue. And there's a lot of stress on offshore supply chains, and we see that globally from things like the PPE for medical support. So what have we seen leading organisations do successfully to manage some of these issues? So certainly we've seen a lot of organisations implement an emergency operations team to manage the crisis. So currently it's not normal operation. So organisations have put in a structure where they can manage the crisis on a daily basis. They can look at the issues, they can make real-time decisions, look at real-time planning, but also and be quite flexible in how they address the issues. An important part of that is assessing the supply chains for weakness and choke points. So that's really understanding and mapping the supply chain, understanding where the supply chain is, where are the weak points and where are the choke points, and then what are the alternatives around that. And that's hopefully procurement people and supply chain people have really put in resiliency capabilities. So if it's supply, it's secondary suppliers or even third suppliers, and being able to activate that resilience capability. With systems like Zycus, for example, you can get good data from current operations. So good organisations are using that data to make decisions going forward. And we know that some organisations, if they didn't have that, would basically be making their best value judgment, not decisions based on data. In some organisations, the supply chains have changed so dramatically that they're unreliable, that micro supply chains have been developed, and good procurement people and supply chain people have been able to react quite quickly to develop those, and classically that's occurred in PPE. And organisations that have had longer planning times have had to get used to real-time planning and making decisions a whole lot faster, and that in some organisations that's quite a change. So that's it from the GRA side. We'll hand back to Zycus, and we'll look forward to any questions towards the end.
So much, Andrew, Carter, and Tim. I think those were some good insights on, how has procurement changed, and how has the requirements for digitization with the Industry 4.0 technologies changed over the period of time, and where we are right now. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about a few topics that we've seen, and a few trends that we've seen recently over the past month or so. Ashish and I are going to look at, what have our clients come back to us, what are they doing right now with, technologies that we've enabled them with, and how are these AI bots that learn by themselves and that can be configured to address certain risks and requirements. How do they really impact and help you, and especially during a crisis like this? What are our clients looking for from these bots? So we're going to start off with a quick look at analytics again, spend analytics, which is becoming a crucial driver. We've seen a huge surge on requirements around insights from spend and regional insights. We'll take a look at what are these actionable insights that AI can actually give you, and what are these bots, and what are they going to do for you, as an example, in a process that you really need to automate, and how could you have some of these bots go ahead and perform certain actions for you. Now, what are we also going to look at is how sourcing strategies are changing. What are the things that are coming in as requests for updates in our client systems, and I'll tell you a little bit of insights around those two, along with some clients that are supporting their suppliers and suppliers of their suppliers with cash flow during this crisis. All right, now for the first part, let's take a quick look at what are our clients doing towards the spend analytics front, and what are the things that they are really looking at for insights at this point of time. Now, Of course, with spend analytics, we've seen a resurgence of requirements focused along, cost reduction because of the crisis, and of course, before that, a lot of other things like compliance and risk assessments and cycle time reductions were a major role. But we've seen a new resurgence of requirements around cost reductions because of the crisis. Now, all of these components are again part of the spend analytics module, and like Andrew mentioned earlier, any spend analytics module is as good as the data that's in there, and only when you get quality data in there can you have a quality output, which is part of the spend analytics module. What our clients are doing a lot right now is using a dashboard that we've created for them in spend analytics to identify risk with spend. And this is right over here towards the bottom left, the screenshot that talks about the COVID assessment spend dashboard that our clients are using. This dashboard essentially works through, where are your suppliers present, what are you buying from them, what is the purpose of these purchases, how much is being spent, what is the COVID impact on these regions and the suppliers that are providing you those commodities from those regions. And this has become a driver to other insights and inputs that our clients are using to identify risk. Now, we've also seen a resurgence in compliance tracking and ensuring that, those payment term compliances or contract compliances are really enforced and are happening and have been taking place over a period of time. And these are, again, insights that Spend Analytics module, like the Zycus solutions, can provide you with. Now, again, the output of all of these analysis again needs to include the factor of risk, and what our clients are also doing is identifying risk not just from internal indices like delivery details or compliance details or even surveys. They're also using a lot of information from third-party vendors like DNB or BVD or Dunson or EcoVadis, where they take inputs from them for compliance, for sustainability information, for financial risk or regional risk details. And all of this essentially gives insights into which suppliers are more critical right now, where are the scores falling, what are the things that you really need to take a look at. And of course, along with this, contracts play a huge role. And my colleague Ashish has worked with a few of our clients in the region, in the Australia region, for contract compliance. Ashish is going to talk us about a bit on what's happening in the contract world.
Yeah, so typically this is one of the critical areas which we're seeing a lot of interest in today's time, especially during the COVID crisis, because everyone wants to start analyzing their current contracts, identify means of maybe extending their relationships with the supplier, or maybe triggering certain clauses like force majeure or something. And the first and the foremost thing to identify in here is whether do you actually have that clause in your contract or not. And skimming through maybe 500 to 1,000 contracts or even more than that, and maybe number of pages as well associated with it, that's going to be a tough task. So these are some things which can be automated by a bot. We have come up with a few specialized bots for these areas called as force majeure bots, and also it identifies the contract risk parameters as well. So let's just say when you're creating a new contract in the system and you're signing on suppliers third-party paperwork, you have no idea about the kind of clauses that are currently in there. How does it align with your current legal pre-approved templates, etc. So what this bot will do is it will smartly match those clauses with your current pre-approved legal templates and will come up with a risk score and will tell you what are the issues based on which this risk scores have been populated. So these are some of the smarts that we are developing in the tool right now. Adriel, if you can jump on to the next slide.
Absolutely. All right. So yes, with force majeure, we've seen a few examples, and right now I'm in India too, and we've seen a chain of cinemas really invoke the force majeure on malls and the regions that they were in, and this was really an awakening call for a lot of people, where they had to check the contracts of not just their suppliers but also of their clients, and be prepared for upcoming notifications too. So we have seen a lot of inputs that have been coming in on these lines too. All right, for the next one, talking a little bit about sourcing strategies and how our clients have changed how they look at their sourcing strategies right now. Of course, one of the biggest factors is analyzing the exposure of the supply chain, and making sure that the supply chain exposure and supply chain disruptions are minimized. And a big part of this is enabled via sourcing solutions, which lets clients change processes for sourcing in a real time without having to go out there and release a notice and educate everybody about what's the new process. Essentially, they change the workflow of how certain categories are procured, which are essential and critical at the point of time, and that reflects directly in the tool. Everybody is automatically notified. So they are making a lot of changes right now, our clients are, and these are essentially driven towards ensuring minimal supply chain exposure. Of course, identifying critical categories and commodities becomes a big chunk of the input to decide how you're going to manage these sourcing strategies during the crisis. And all of this comes in from data-driven insights, not just from spend analytics, but also from usage analytics, where our clients are looking at how have their users been using the solutions, what parts of the solutions would require current updates and modifications to adjust because of the crisis. And this takes us to our next point, which is really the workflow and control systems. We've seen a lot of updates to accommodate, business continuity in approval chains, and of course, because a digital solution enables, approvals from mobile apps or phones, or essentially it enables working from home and not and having a distributed procurement team. And we've seen that too. A lot of our clients are moving into a distributed control channel for procurement, depending on the criticality of categories. Supplier relationships is getting quite crucial right now, and we're seeing a lot of our customers get into programs with suppliers, and I'm going to talk about this in our next slide. But development of these relationships with critical suppliers becomes much easier once you have a solution where you've already been tracking what's been happening with that supplier for a period of time. You've already worked with them on action plans and development programs, and right now a lot of our clients are using the same platforms to go ahead and talk to their customers and the suppliers in terms of what are we going to do next. Of course, we are looking at a very strong bounce back from the crisis, and a lot of market research is also saying that we will bounce back from this crisis quickly, but it is going to be a while before we are back to what we were maybe 6 months or a year back. It's going to be a while before the industry moves back to 100% or even more than what it was earlier. And of course, relationships play a crucial part in the bounce back too. Now, working on a post-crisis plan again becomes critical, and Ashish has also worked with one of our clients in the region for the sourcing strategy and a post-crisis plan. Ashish, your thoughts?
Yeah, so we've seen that across different customers, and one of the biggest healthcare providers in Victoria who have partnered with us, they've actually gone ahead and deployed a very specific strategy for dealing with the COVID crisis. And that's something which we've seen as a trend coming up in the market, wherein whichever systems all our customers or maybe different companies are having right now, the expectation is to help companies with the mitigation of these certain number of categories which might be critical for the organizational buying process, to help them out to find a way and also develop a post-crisis plan in conjunction with them. So whosoever is going ahead and helping them out is is pretty much delivering a better output for the community as well as for the organization. And that's something which we've seen to be becoming a trend, which is being enabled by the technology. So Retail,
Absolutely.
can you
Thank
go?
you. Thank you, Ashish. Yes. And yes, of course, managing orders for the healthcare section is also becoming a huge task right now. And things for critical, extremely critical commodities like ventilators or masks or PPE commodities, they are becoming quite critical right now. And there's huge surge in the requirements. So managing, in the chaos is becoming a key part. And of course, the solution works towards it. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how some of our clients are really working on their supplier relationships and what they're doing. We've also seen a lot of our clients start programs that are focused around the crisis, where the first set of activities, which is in red on the screen right now, is where they identify who are my suppliers who really need help, who really need support at this point of time, who are at a critical stage in their supply chain because of the crisis. And to do this, they've taken in inputs from, again, third-party vendors like DNB or BVD, and looked at financial risk and predictions in terms of how a crisis would impact a supplier of those sorts. And we've seen this really come out large in the FMCG too, where they're looking at the smaller suppliers that they have, which are distributed, and how they can help these suppliers. Yes, our clients have been getting a lot of requests from suppliers to help during the crisis, and a few of our clients are also conducting surveys, to build relationships with their suppliers and ensure things are going smoothly, and come up with a post-crisis plan. All of these, again, in red, are the inputs to what our clients are doing right now, with planning and analysis on, and to decide what are our next steps going to be. Some of them lead to suppliers, requesting for early payment with the payment terms updates on purchase orders or invoices, again, which are enabled through the solution, including solutions like dynamic discounting, where a few suppliers are with cash flow issues at this current point of time, would like to get into a dynamic discounting program and have a day-wise or a week-wise split in terms of the discount percentages on payment terms. Some of our clients are also working on grants and other mechanisms to really support suppliers and the suppliers of suppliers through the crisis. And okay, moving on to our next topic over here. This one really talks about, the people aspect of the procurement 4.0, and what are the things that are going to really impact internal, external clients. We talk about answering a question that we always get in terms of what's going to happen in procurement with the surgence of AI. We'll talk to you about, what our clients are doing, and we'll talk about a little bit on the process automation bit of it too, and what happens to processes when you incorporate AI in them.
Sure. So here, as a part of our impact for internal and external clients, we have classified it into 3 different areas for internal and external. For the internal, it's going to impact the way we've been doing business at each and every level. So if you talk about the management, for the top execs, for the head of departments, etc., you'll be having a lot more automation introduced into your process. When you talk about the basic purchases and employers who will be creating requisitions or maybe purchase orders, they would want a certain level of automation in terms of approvals, in terms of getting the right supplier contacts in for your sourcing activities, and also getting the right rates from them. So a lot of automation will be brought about in that area. And when you talk about cross-functional teams, that would be collaboration during all these procurement processes. It could just be reviewing contracts from certain stakeholders, or maybe as complex as getting approvals based on your authority limits. That's your delegation of authority rules from different people. So that's how, if you bring about automation, it's going to touch almost every person in your organization internally. When you talk about external entities, you've got your suppliers, your customers, who will be driven by all these new systems and new processes that you'll be incorporating. At the same time, if there are any requirements from a government standpoint or from an auditing standpoint that you need to submit some amount of automated reports beyond a particular threshold, or if there's any discrepancy identified in your process, you need to highlight it to the auditors. All those things are being driven manually in the current process. So we have thought about a few things wherein AI can be introduced, and this can be pushed across to all these stakeholders that you're seeing on your screen. And those specific process, Adriel, if you can go on to the next slide, the slide after this. The slide after this, Adriel. So we've thought about, yeah. Yeah, so we've thought about a few areas in your entire procurement process where we can go about with the automation of these activities. The first one is accounts payable, wherein we see a lot of manual activity still undertaken in your processes. So scanning of invoices, receiving hard copy from your vendors, and then manually feeding all these information into your transactional system. That's something which can be driven by the system. When it comes down to supplier onboarding, checking for each and every supplier's information in terms of what are their financial status over the last few years, what are the credit risk ratings, etc. So all these elements are being done manually right now. It's time consuming. At the same time, it consumes a lot of efforts from your internal team members for collaborating with different stakeholders. If you tell the system, but the AI bot can automate all these activities by pulling the right information from the right sources and presenting it to you either in one single dashboard or maybe in the form of a single exportable report format. The third area is requisition and order management. What we spoke about before was about when you create a requisition, when you want to buy a particular commodity in your critical category, you would want to source from the right set of supplier. So the system can drive this compliance by showing you the right contracted vendor rates. At the same time, if a contracted vendor is not available, the system can automatically go about creating a sourcing event and then sourcing the right rates from your respective suppliers. All these things can also be driven by our bot. Then when you talk about the negotiation piece, based on the sentiments of a particular user, the bot can smartly understand what are the right set of rates that needs to be proposed to the vendor in order to achieve the right costing for a particular sourcing event. For contract management, it's more or less similar. You would want to identify all the risk associated with a typical third-party contract when you're signing a new contract. At the same time, for all the contingencies similar to a COVID crisis right now, if there's any other issue coming up, like maybe an event needs to be canceled in the near future because of some unforeseen circumstances, and you want to check for the contractual terms and conditions, the bot should be able to pick up those elements and present you your options that you can execute in the near future. So all those things can be driven via AI. And also when you talk about stakeholder collaboration, sending the right information to the right people in your organization and getting approvals from them. If the approval cycle time is not maintained, who it should be escalated to in your approval workflow. All that can be driven via AI. So as you can see, even from these examples, Adriel, if you can go on to the previous slide after this. So all these examples are not replacing any human intervention or maybe any work that you may be doing right now. All that we are talking about by means of AI, we are trying to optimize the level of process and the mundane tasks that you may be doing on a day-to-day basis. We are trying to automate that so that you can focus your time and effort on much more productive activity that can be fruitful for your organization. So with AI, as you can see on your screen, the 2 points, we intend to get rid of all the repetitive and mundane tasks, and that will enable you to focus on more on the strategic side of things for your organization. Adriel, I think you had a point in here as well.
Absolutely. Yes, so I know we're at the top of our hour, a little bit over actually. So the last thing that I'd like to end with probably is just an example from the aviation industry. With autopilots coming in probably around 1914, and that being the first representation of AI, it didn't really get rid of pilots in cockpits, but they were enabled to make more strategic decisions and eventually just put their hands in for 7 minutes during takeoff and landing. And we're looking at not the same, of course, but similar exposure to procurement teams with AI and it enabling them to make better decisions, safer decisions, and more concrete results being driven out of processes. All right, I'd like to open up for questions. If you can stay back for a few minutes while we answer the questions, please feel free, or we will definitely send them out over an email to you. Simanthi, could you please help us with any questions that came up in the chat?
Yeah, so the first question is, do you see procurement operations being centralized or decentralized across sectors or jurisdictions? That is, are we moving to central procurement teams or procurement taking place in business teams?
Sure, it's Andrew Dillon here. Perhaps I'll take that one. We see organisations using various different forms of the organisation structure. So some organisations have centralised procurement teams, some have them dispersed, and classically some use a hybrid model where there's a central team looking at processes, systems, data, and then there are also teams out in the business units as well. But I think the key thing here is that the structures can work in a number of ways, and they can work effectively. But it's the old saying that structure follows a strategy. So you've got to really have your strategies in place, your right people in place, your skill levels, your digital systems and tools in place. So the organisation structure is probably a little less important than having all the key elements of a good procurement organisation, and in particular the digital transformation elements.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. All right, our next question is, has the current COVID-19 situation seen a rise in the risk of corruption or lack of integrity in the supply chain? And let me take up that one. So in terms of, the change with COVID-19, we have seen an increase in the exposure of supply chain. It need not tend too much towards the risk of corruption or integrity, but we are seeing a huge rise in the exposure because of the disruption in logistics and the whole supply chain process. And of course, this leaves a lot of open chunks in the armor of supply chain, which need to be plugged in with solutions and tighter compliance. So that is definitely a part of what organizations are moving towards. The next question's on what is dynamic discounting. Now let me pick this one too. It's really a solution-enabled process where suppliers can offer you different rates of discount per day. Let's say, as an example, if you had a payment term of 30 during the first 10 days, the next 10 days, and the next 10 days, you would have different discount rates being applied per day that the solution will automatically apply. And depending on when the payment is being made, it will automatically apply the discount percentage, and you would have and suppliers that really need cash flow support right now opting for programs like this. One more question that we have is, can the tool integrate into existing ERP systems and extract data on an ongoing basis? The answer to that is yes. All of Zycus's implementations have been integrated on top of ERP systems, and these are integrated via various mechanisms, let it be middleware, let it be APIs, file exchanges, or even RPA bots that pick up information and integrate them. So there are multiple mediums of integration, and they can very easily be integrated with ERP systems. All right, one more question is, if some clause is not there, can you add the clause in the contract? So yes, as part of the bot that my colleague Ashish was talking to you about, what it does is it has a repository of your legal templates and clauses, and it looks at the type of contract and the region and the constraints of the contract and recommends certain clauses if you'd like to, you can automatically add the recommendation or add a new clause by yourself, which can automatically be sent for review to the legal teams. They get it on Word or get it in their email and complete their review process and submit. So yes, you can add clauses if it's not present in the contract. Our next question is, do we have some recommended clauses in the system? So yes, the answer to that is any AI-based technology would work on something called that its training set, which is the data that it's been given. So it learns from the data. And for a contract management AI engine, it would be the recommended legal clauses for types and subtypes of contracts. So every clause would have a certain context with alternates and fallbacks, and they would be recommended by the system too. The last question that we have in here is, which industries are using the AI system more at present, and which sectors need it badly? Andrew, Tim, Carter, do you have any insights on industries that look at the AI system more, or which sectors need it badly?
Sure. I think we've seen AI help in a lot of industries, across broad industries, really. So if you look at the standard procurement processes, AI has helped in a lot of digitizing those, getting rid of manual processing. So I don't think I could sort of say that in certain industries it's used more than in others, but it's broadly used across all industries and sectors. Carter, would you add anything?
Yeah, my comments would be more on, I mean, it is application industry specific. So we're certainly seeing AI and machine learning being used in, say, retail. And again, it tends to be more granular and rapid response. So in terms of tactical decision making, we're seeing some of the local supermarket organizations look at daily demand based on weather changes. So they're using those sort of analytics to say, what will the daily demands be based on weather patterns? And then as such, how does store replenishments need to operate in relation to that? We're also seeing it being used for ranging. So, regional or store-based ranging based on consumer preferences to actually change the ranging. So I suppose it does appear to come up on a case-by-case basis. I don't have as much insight into it personally around the procurement side, much more in the supply chain around planning. But yeah, there are many, many examples. But I'd say retail is probably one of the organizations or industries that's used it most. I'm also seeing it being used more in manufacturing as well. So in terms of quality assurance and quality control for manufacturing, I've also seen it being used in agriculture for crop picking. So assessment of quality of the fruit by using automation and picking. And I've also seen automation and machine learning and AI being used in a lot of the retail-based replenishment systems that service online demands. So these are things like the auto store fulfillment engines that are kind of cube-based storage and retrieval systems that automatically reslot based on inputs, and will also do kind of relay the queue based on the predicted orders. So look, it is a very broad spectrum of where it's being used. And again, it's on a case-by-case basis. So our view is really you have to have a hypothesis, then you actually test to see if it makes a difference, because AI and machine learning isn't necessarily superior in all cases. So prove the business case before you actually start to invest or roll out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carter and Andrew. And yes, I think very rightly said, the applications of AI are quite widespread, and any process that you think requires complex thinking or strategies, or any task that you think can be automated by an RPA is essentially where AI can fit in. But yes, there are certain industries that have picked it up quicker and are reaping the benefits quicker too. All right, so those were probably the last set of questions that we received on our chat today. All right, I'm sorry, we have one more. Our contract lapsed on March. Is there a possibility to extend the period because of COVID? So yes, the solutions also look at which contracts do you have right now, and insights into terms of what kind of inputs can it give you for termination or contract closures, and dashboards in terms of what are the contracts that you should be reviewing really quickly, and things that you could probably change very quickly with there too. All right, any last questions on chat before we close this? Simanthi, anything else that you see in there?
No, Adriel, that's it.
All right, perfect. So I know we are a wee bit over what we've planned for this webinar, but it was great speaking to all of you. Thank you so much, Andrew, Carter, Tim, for joining in on our webinar today. We are going to send across the content, the presentation that you looked at today, along with the recording and a few of the answers that we talked about. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us at sales@zycus.com, or you could reach out to any of us on LinkedIn, or reply to Simanthi on the email that she sent out, or the webinar. Thank you so much for your time today. We hope these insights were helpful, and we look forward to talking to you in the future about the technologies and trends that we just looked at today. Thank you. I hope you have a great day ahead.